Babylon, her system and impending doom. When Pastor was still teaching about Babylon being Sodom and Egypt, I saw this vision. There was this very beautiful, extremely gigantic female figure with a crown on her head. She was dressed in an apparel that was cut between wine and purple in its color, more of wine. There were between 7 to 10 altars spread out in a horizontal manner before her. Leading to each of these altars was a path which had so many people on it. On the paths were under bondages or slavery and at different levels. It was a perfect organism. On the first level were the paramount taskmasters who seemed to be high-ranking demonic princes themselves, only that they were enslaved to her. These huge powers were obligated to ensure that people from all over the world came to offer sacrifices on these altars. They were dragging smaller demonic entities with the heavy chains on their hands towards the altars. Understand that there was one of these huge princes assigned to each of the paths, and each of them were assigned to the specific altar at which their path ended. What I am describing now is what was happening on each path. These smaller demonic princes had chained and were dragging humans in turn, not just any human but influential ones like governmental authorities, inclusive of the military heads of massive business establishments. The heads of social media establishments would also be included in this category, and religious leaders. These tier of persons in turn held chains with which they dragged persons under their authority, who in turn dragged persons under themselves, and so on. It got down to the family level, such that I saw a month-old to 2-year-old babies at the end of some of the unending chaining, being dragged too. Everyone on these paths were hypnotized. Totally zombies. I mean, some people were being dragged along with their entire businesses. For instance, if you had a shop, you and your shop were being dragged along. If you sold cows, your cows would be dragged along with you. Talk about the altars. Whenever these people came to any of the altars, they had to make sacrifices. I saw some of the activities going on the altars. One of them, there were this man and woman having sexual intercourse. On another there were 2 men doing the same thing, homosexuality. On another it was 2 women, lesbianism. On another was someone having a sexual intercourse, bestiality. On another there was bloodshed going on, slitting people's throats and killing in ways that were just out of this world, a lot of human sacrifices. When the blood of the innocent is shed during wars, it seemed it amounted to human sacrifices, almost like it was the same as killing a human being as a ritual rite to get money or devilish powers. On another, I saw people offering their tongues as the sacrifice. Whenever anyone got to the altar, he would pull out his tongue and drop on the altar. And the tongues of the people were alive and wriggling all over the altar. The altar was full of human tongues. These altars were quite massive, and seemed to be one of the most indispensable. The sacrifices on this altar were very potent because those who seemed to mainly give their tongues were Christians, those who were supposed to be on the side of the army who are supposed to defeat this woman. As sacrifices were being made, incense arising from each of the altars into the nostrils of the woman. She seemed to have 3 nostrils instead of 2. Each altar gave its own color of incense. At some point, I was shown what was inside this woman. Inside her, there was a beast. She was like the outer layer, or even merely the skin, of the beast. She was just its facade. Then inside this beast, I saw that there was yet another beast. It was a wonder to see. Furthermore, the insides of this innermost beast was more or less what I'd describe as a factory or training ground for demons of all sorts. There were demons being trained for war while they seemed to also be proliferating in their numbers. It was more or less a sort of military cantonment for them. They were just marching, jumping and charging, that is, being eager to go to war. Before seeing the internals of the woman as I described above, I saw an arrangement of the army of light which was sent to fight her. They were being sent to her in different fleets of airships and spaceships, or warships. They were composed of light. Each fleet represented a generation of God's army mobilized to fight against her, and each successive fleet had warships bigger than those in the preceding, except for the last. This last fleet seemed just like the first. The sad thing about all of this was that the woman took them all out, except for the last, which was just approaching her. In fact, they'd barely get close to her when they'll just fry up and disappear. She didn't even need to turn around and look at them, they were attacking from behind her. This wasn't going to be the case with the last fleet. She'd underrate them and equate them to the first and others she had taken out before, and it's more or less was going to be her undoing. This fleet must win her. The last fleet represented the last day army of God. Another thing I noticed was that in one of the generations of the fleets, third or fourth I think, there was a black warship. All the warships were composed of white light, which looked bigger than the rest of the member warships in that particular fleet. I had a bad feeling about it. Probably represented falsehood that pretended like it had the same purpose of fighting against the woman, but eventually and actually, was on her side. Brother. S.E. Sunday, November 3, 2019. Copyright God's Lighthouse, 2022.